Hello, I'm Annabelle Lee, and welcome back to another episode of the Talking Classical podcast. Anthony Roth Costanzo is one of the world's most in-demand countertenors, who has recently completed a run of Philip Glass's opera Akhnaten at English National Opera. I had the great opportunity to see the dress rehearsal last month. It was absolutely worth it, and this opera is unlike anything that you will ever see on an operatic stage. And to quote a recent review, if there is a production that makes the case for why English National Opera should still remain in London at the Coliseum, this is the production. Now, in this short interview, Anthony very kindly took some time out from his off day to speak to me. We talked about some of the challenges of performing the very demanding role of Akhnaten, working directly with Philip Glass, the development of the countertenor voice, and bringing joy to audiences on stage. And since recording this interview, we've heard the very sad that the legendary and groundbreaking countertenor James Bowman, who is briefly mentioned in this interview, died last month at the age of 81. An inspiration, I'm sure, to many countertenors across the globe.
Hey there, how are you?
It's so lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Thank you. How's the run going of Akhnaten?
It's going good. It's going really well. There's a lot of other things going on at the same time, but it's been great.
Thank you. Yeah. It's so amazing that 3 years coming out of the lockdown is in a really terrible time financially. The run is pretty much sold out. You got 5-star reviews. I mean, it's just amazing to see everyone back, isn't it?
It is. It's so great. And we can never take it for granted. You know, it's so exciting to not only be able to make art, but to have it connect to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, how long have you been here in the UK for?
Well, of course, I was here in the fall doing the BBC proms and doing a show at Wilton's Music Hall. But then I came back February 1st to start rehearsals for this. So that's been really exciting.
Great. And are you enjoying life here in the UK?
I love it. I love living in London. I think the diversity of cultural experience is really wonderful. And I bike all through the city and I have a great time. And I love the restaurants and the people and everything. So
Great. Any particular favorites? Or
I love this one restaurant in Soho called Duck Soup. It's a little tiny one, but I really love it. So
cool. I just want to get the elephant out of the room, out of the way. You probably know what I'm going to say. The nakedness. What is it like being butt naked in front of 2,000 people at the Coliseum? I mean, literally and figuratively. Is it something that you've become more comfortable with now in this role, or is it still a scary moment?
I will say it can be terrifying every time you do it, but it's also empowering in other ways and kind of liberating. It's such a ritual the way we do it. It's not at all sensational. It's not at all about anything sexualized, but rather it's about this kind of birth and rebirth. And so because of that, if you can get your mind in this ritualistic place, it becomes a little bit less terrifying. The other thing I've realized is that the extent to which you can control the audience's attention and focus when you are naked, because they're so on the edge of their seat, it becomes much greater, becomes much more amplified. So it's really an opportunity to forge this kind of strong bond with the audience.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when I came to the dress rehearsal, it just seemed like the audience were really respectful of that moment when you come down the stairs. But do you get different reactions depending on where you're doing the role, or are audiences generally, are they very, respectful of that moment?
I think that for whatever strange reason, they've been incredibly respectful.
Yeah.
We've never had, people take photos and things like that, to my knowledge. So it's because it is a kind of sacred and ritualistic atmosphere.
Yeah. And you also think of the context as well, the purification rites as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it has almost like a religious preceding ritual to it. And I think people perceive it that way, which is exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about the relationship that, you and Zachary have in this production, because he was another standout person. in this production. I mean, I think people take speaking roles, narration roles, I think a bit for granted in these productions. But I mean, the relationship is just so powerful. I mean, even the scene where, he carries you having been just so struck with death after the city is destroyed, which is such a moving moment in itself. Tell me more about that.
There's only a couple of people who have done every performance of this show.
Yeah.
One of them, Zach. And when I say every performance, I mean all 6 runs. This last night or the night before last, we did our 37th show together. And so really, this is something that we've created together.
Yeah.
That is the very essence of it is our relationship and the dynamic we can create. And he gives me a kind of energy every time we do it, the way he says the words and the way he varies them. And just his general charisma on stage, I think, helped to really carry this show. And there's a lot of trust between us as well, because when you do a performance 37 times, or by the end of this run, it'll be 44 or something like that. You do it on days when you don't feel good. You do it on days when you do feel good because of things in your life, because of your health and all of that. So to have the constancy and trust of an incredible colleague and a really wonderful performer and a kind person like Zach makes it a pleasure to get through in all these contexts.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What is it like to work directly with Philip Glass?
Philip has been amazing. Of course, he wrote this opera 30 years ago, but he's been so supportive and so excited. And so he's always just a joy when he comes backstage and comes to take a bow. He's living in the thrill of the renaissance of his opera, of Akhnaten becoming this kind of cultural phenomenon. And so he's just wonderful. He's a gentle and kind presence, and he always comes with questions about how we're able to rehearse what he's done or prepare it, or just talking about different aspects of it. And he's great. And when I asked him to make an original composition for my prom, the glass handle BBC proms we did in September, he was able to do that, which was really exciting. So it's been one of the great joys of my life to be able to work with such a monumental figure in culture and one who crosses between so many different cultural worlds.
Absolutely. So when you are doing Akhnaten, then is it still very much, a collaborative process? Will Philip Glass still come and see the productions, give you notes, or will you offer, advice about how you perhaps want to interpret the music? Or
Philip says very little. He'll occasionally say one thing or the other.
Of course he would.
But generally, what is true about Philip is that he likes to leave the artist space. And that's true in both his music and his approach as a composer. He puts what he has on the page, and he doesn't put a lot of markings in terms of dynamics or affectations or things like that. He wants the artist to do it and to fill the space. But it's really easy to do that in the wrong way. It's really easy to do that in the way you would with Puccini, or something that takes away from the minimalism that exists, that's inspired by a lot of these Indian ragas. And
I suppose put your own interpretation on the music, right?
Yes. So how do you infuse it with emotion, and how do you infuse it with phrasing and pacing and all of these things without somehow disturbing the very essence of what it is? And that is the puzzle that you have to solve as a performer. But he does leave a tremendous amount of space for the artist to do that. And that's part of what the repetitions are about.
So how then do you go about interpreting these wordless melodies that you have in the score? Because they seem deceptively simple, but I imagine that you have to really make them count, when you have your moment in the sun, quite literally.
Yeah, absolutely. You must. I mean, what we did and the approach we took, Phelim McDermott, the director, is so incredible. And Karen Kamensik, the conductor, knows the Glass style so well. So working together with them, Phelim gave us these movement qualities, and they were a departure point for a series of improvisations that were to basically improvise different rituals. But we also did a lot of research, each in our own right. Phelim researched the Book of the Dead and all the rituals in ancient Egypt, and I researched Akhnaten a lot. And I was even given a visiting fellowship at Oxford this year in Egyptology. So,
Wow.
the research that we did allowed us to sort of construct a storyline. We almost made a storyboard on the wall of a series of events that, of course, the libretto tells you vaguely what happens. Akhnaten gets crowned king, but that could go on for 12 minutes. So in the course of that, we sort of started to fill in what the different plot points for us were. Now, there's no guarantee that the audience perceives them the same way. But what it does to have that storyline in your mind and in the staging is to fill it with a kind of significance. And then the audience can much more easily project their own storytelling onto that. And I think that's part of what makes it not only successful as something you see once, but makes people want to come see it again, is it's somewhat enigmatic and you can tell different versions of the story in your mind each time you see it. And that works even for children who, it's very much like the play that children do where they take dolls and they imagine a story that's happening. They do that. They project a story onto the stage because it's not so prescriptive. It's not such a detailed plot in the same way Carmen is. So I think that we have all these visual images and all of these emotional impetuses that allow that kind of storytelling to be possible for the audience.
Yeah. Something which Claire Wicks, the principal flautist at ENO, who played with you so beautifully, and I were really struck by, is your stamina for those 3 hours. How do you maintain it?
Every time I start this production, I realize that you have to build up the stamina. And so in rehearsals, I never, ever mark. Marking is when you sing not full out.
Ah, interesting.
So every day I sing full out, and that helps to start to build the stamina of my voice. And you have to learn how to kind of pace yourself, not to give too much, not to blow it all out at one moment. But also you have to get used to the constant output of sound that happens in a lot of the scenes. And then physically, because I do want to look good naked when I appear naked, I go to the gym every day. And that actually helps me a lot because physically it's very demanding. Going up and down the stairs and doing it very, very slowly is a lot of work and it's a lot of pain and all of that. So the stronger that I am and the more I'm able to go to the gym, which I do 6 days a week and work really hard at in this project, the better the outcome is for me.
Certainly pays off. So how do you prepare for a role like this? I'm thinking, do you have like a pre-performance routine? Like it's 24 hours before, you're about to go on. You're very kindly taking some time out of your day off. How do you prepare yourself psychologically, physically for the extravaganza that you're about to do?
Yeah, I mean, you have to give yourself time to sleep for sure, to drink a lot of water. Those are the obvious things. And I have to practice the day before I do the show. Each day I have to make sure to get my voice for those stamina reasons. If you take the day off, you'll never make it through the next day. You have to kind of have the motor running. And then I have to often go through, and I do it on the treadmill sometimes. I listen to a recording of some of the more complicated scenes to make sure that I don't forget how many repeats there are or various things like that. So there's a lot of preparation that goes into it.
Yeah. And I mean, the music is just so kind of complicated, rhythmically. And I saw you have, not only Karen, who is so amazing, like Philip Glass's muse, but you have, the assistant conductors as well. I'm sure that this has probably never happened, but what happens if you do have a little slip up, like in the melodies? Do you just try and keep it cool and just carry on, or?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the orchestra will get off, and so that will make it hard for us to figure out where we are, something like that. There's lots of different little things that happen, but you do have to keep a calm head. And Karen looks and is very calm the whole time she's doing it. And that helps us be really calm. So if anything happens, you kind of have an awareness of where you are. You look at Karen, and she generally gives us a stop sign or a finger that says, hold on. And then you can sort of easily get back on track. But that requires also that you really know the piece inside and out.
Absolutely. Yeah. How do you recover after doing 3 hours? Is it back to the hotel and Epsom salts, or do you watch a box set? Or
No, I try and be a normal person. I think that's the best way to recover. I have a drink with my friends
oh,
or
that's
a bite
good.
with my friends.
That's nice.
And then you come home. And the best way is to just make sure I leave myself 8 hours of sleep before whatever onslaught of work or preparation for the next role happens the following day.
That's so good that you can allow yourself, those little luxuries of having a pint in the pub, because I do know that, having interviewed a number of singers for this series, a lot of them can be very precious about the voice, and understandably so. But I think at the same time, having that bond with your colleagues, socializing with them, is really important too.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're not a human being, that comes across on stage if it's all work. And so I think it's important to have that human aspect, and that always comes through in the performance as well.
For sure, for sure. I want to talk a little bit about your musical journey, because here in England, the countertenors come through mostly the cathedral choir system, Oxbridge choirs, choral scholarships, but you came through a slightly unconventional route. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I started on Broadway when I was a kid, or in musical theater before that, but then I wound up on Broadway by the time I was 11 and doing Broadway shows. And I think that gave me these real theatrical instincts, and theater is kind of the basis of who I am as a performance. Then in my teenage years, I performed in a Merchant Ivory film, and that was really exciting to have a real role and to learn about acting and art and dance and all kinds of things that James Ivory, the director of that film, introduced me to. And so right away, this kind of interdisciplinary approach emerged. And then when I went to Princeton University for my undergrad, I got all of this academic underpinning, which has been really kind of essential in the way that I approach putting the disciplines together, learning about what stories we want to tell and how to tell other people's stories in addition to mine. And so I think it's really interesting because the music was always there too, and I worked very hard on it. I went to conservatory after Princeton at the Manhattan School of Music and did the conventional conservatory route. But I have a lot of different points of reference and a lot of different ways that I've approached this art form. And to me, that's been a huge benefit. And it's allowed me to produce and create work that goes beyond just sort of fitting into the normal box of opera and being an opera singer. And also, I think it is, as you point out, an interesting contrast with a lot of the way people learn music in the UK coming from the choral tradition, where the idea is to kind of blend with all of the voices around you.
And also pinpoint musical accuracy.
Yeah, which sometimes I certainly lack in favor of theatrical prowess. So I think it is a different approach, and it's interesting to hear how it manifests itself in the voice and otherwise.
Yeah, because you come from, I suppose, because I've done concerts, I'm a flautist, and I've done Matthew Passion's B minor masses with countertenors who, have very slim voices, lovely, pure voices. And then I've done concerts with, countertenors have these big, robust voices, and they can fill a concert hall like Marilyn Horne style. I imagine that was your training more, I suppose, in the second vein, right? Or did you kind of want to go down the early music route? Or?
Oh, I definitely love the early music route, but I don't think that necessarily means a smaller or thinner voice. I think the operatic sound and the way it can envelop the audience is what I've always been interested in. And that is, in a way, I think, the modern countertenor practice in the opera house. And so, in order to fill these spaces like the Met and the Coliseum and these big 3,000 or 4,000 seat theaters, you have to have that kind of technique and that kind of operatic sound, I think. And I like hearing early music and new music, both repertoires that I do in that vein.
Mm-hmm. Would you ever consider doing, I suppose, romantic repertoire? Have you ever dipped your toe in like Mahler? Or because Yestin Davis has, he's just recorded the Schubert song cycles. Is that something you'd ever consider?
Yes, I sing romantic repertoire, as it were, all the time in recital and in concert. And I've sung Les Nuits d'été with the New York Philharmonic, and I've sung pieces by Liszt and all kinds of things. So I think when it comes to concert and song, there's no reason. And it's actually really fun to hear the countertenor voice in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just been really amazing, I think, particularly for my generation. I think the countertenor voice has had just such a resurgence over the last 20 years, thanks to, people like you, Geston Davis, Patrick Terry, who I've spoken to. And that's completely different to the countertenor movement back in, I suppose, the 70s, 80s, the Dellas, the Bowmans, etc. Why do you think the countertenor has had such a popularity in recent years?
There's an otherness to the voice, which I think is really fascinating. And it captures something about our zeitgeist. If you look at the youth culture where gender becomes much more fluid and where rather than everybody being assimilated or trying to be the same, people are really interested in individuality. And I think the countertenor voice represents that in some ways. And it also is a kind of gateway to the realm of magic, whether that be gods and monsters, villains. It can be applied to take us to somewhere really fantastical. But I'm also interested in how it tells the most normal or human story in a completely different way, in a way that can pique the emotional backbone of the audience and that can draw out this kind of catharsis that we look for when we create opera.
And I was also thinking as well, I suppose that if you look like in the pop world as well, you've got people like, Chris Martin, obviously, the Bee Gees, all using falsetto as well. So I suppose every man maybe has the facility to be a countertenor. I don't know.
They definitely do. And the falsetto sound is one that means a lot of things in pop culture and pop music and has for a long time. And I think that is part of what makes it so exciting. And of course, the castrati in the 18th century and the 17th century are the ones who popularized the form of opera and made it a success. And so I think that this lineage of the high-voiced male is one that's really fascinating to trace and is kind of, and has been part of our culture and popular culture for 400 years and shows no signs of flagging.
Not at all. I just wanted to say, just before I forgot, that it was so lovely to see your Humans of Classical Music video project that we both did together. That was a fun little project over lockdown, wasn't it? Were you asked by Hannah Fiddy to do that?
Yes, I was. And It was so lovely. I'm glad we were able to do that.
Absolutely, yeah. Did you enjoy the challenge of being able to trying to explain classical music in a way that very, I suppose, explaining it to an audience who wouldn't necessarily know about the art form? Because I think for trained musicians like us, the jargon can just seem so taken for granted. I had to do like several takes of mine.
Yeah, I mean, I spend my life trying to bring this music to people who don't necessarily have a way to connect to it and see how it can feel like it's theirs and what we need to do to change how we present it and the institutions that have built structures around it that feel exclusionary, how we can alter that system and how we can change that. So that's a lot of the work I do. And I've just received a large grant from the Mellon Foundation, a large support from them to continue that kind of work and create projects which bring it further. So I'm really interested in how we accomplish that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My final question to ask you, I loved seeing your I Got Rhythm video with the tap dancing, the backflip, and you bring so much joy, whether you're singing at the Colosseum or, backflipping in I Got Rhythm. Is that something that's really important to you as a musician? Because we can just get so hung up on technical perfection. And what was it? Beethoven said, to play without emotion is inexcusable, something like that.
Yes, I completely agree. I think you have to be conveying some emotion. Otherwise, there's no reason to do it. Perfection in itself is really boring.
Yeah.
And the audience is looking for that emotional connection, whether they know it or not. That's what I think has the ability to draw people in. And classical music can be so cathartic, can be so emotional and so extreme in a way that other things can't be. And so we have to always be hunting and searching for that kind of cathartic emotion.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much, Anthony. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for giving up some time on your day off. I'm going to let you go and rest your voice because I know that you've got a pretty big run coming up over the next few weeks. So, yes.
Thank you so much. Great to talk to you, Annabelle.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Talking Classical podcast. I do hope you enjoyed listening. Don't forget you can subscribe to the podcast on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other major outlets where you get your podcasts. You can also follow the Talking Classical podcast on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or the Talking Classical blog. If you have a moment, please would you leave a review or a rating on Apple Podcasts, as this will help to increase visibility and get the podcast to more people. Many thanks for listening once again, and I hope that you'll be able to join me for another podcast very soon. Bye for now.